A goal line stand by that long gray line as the brave old Army team survives. Jayden Daniels brings home the Heisman Trophy, and Pete Thamel enjoys the game as a fan. This is the College GameDay podcast for Monday, December 11th. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. So, Pete, I've got to ask you, did you enjoy the game sitting in the stands watching Army-Navy?
Rece, it was awesome. Like, what a day. So, this is year 20 for me covering national college football, my first Army-Navy game. So there just aren't a lot of firsts left, which is not a complaint. It's a life's dream fulfilled. But it's always one of those things where early in my career I'd be at the Heisman, or you're just flat out exhausted from the season. Also worked a lot of East Coast publications where the game usually was, so I didn't really need to jump there because we would have personnel on the ground. So when the stars aligned, I live in Boston, for Army-Navy to be at Gillette, I called in a favor to the great Lindsay Lloyd, who deserves all the hat tips, and she got 5 tickets. I went with my wife, Kate, and some of her friends, one of whose husband is in Iraq and actually watched Game Day on Saturday morning. Andy Morrissey, he's a pod listener, and Steph actually held up a sign to Andy that got on the air. So that was a highlight. He sent a screenshot back that he saw it, which was really neat. And then, spent a few hours, Rece, aimlessly wandering the parking lots, having an occasional cold beverage and a bite to eat, which I'll tell you this, you and I are often swept out of these like great scenes, right? The tailgate tents as far as the eyes can see in Tuscaloosa, a hot day in Texas with brisket going. You got deep fryers at LSU, and we're wearing ties right up to our Adam's apple. And either we're going to cover the game or we're bouncing to get ready for next week. So there is a lot of FOMO. Now we love our jobs, but there are some days where I'm like, man, wouldn't be bad to go sit and eat some brisket and have a couple beers and watch the noon games and then go in at 3:30, and that doesn't sound like a bad day. So I got to have that day on Saturday, and it was great. The everything about Army-Navy lived up to it. The pageantry was awesome, right? Just the flyovers, the parachuters landing with awesome precision. It was just like goosebumps just everywhere. And I think my takeaway outside of the football was how much that game meant to everyone in the stands. Like that in those communities, that is their Super Bowl. And you could feel that teaming passion, which is just as, robust as Auburn, Alabama, or Notre Dame, USC, or Ohio State, Michigan. It's just in a different form and setting. So wouldn't you say the difference is, though, I agree with you 100%, having been there, the passion, the intensity, the desire to win the game and beat your rival is on par with any of those great rivalries you mentioned. But the difference in the aftermath to me is that there's disappointment but not anger. Among the fans. Did you sense that too? Yes, they're going to stay and watch you sing second. They're not going to go kill the old tree on your square with tree poison, right? Like that. It is great, and there's a lot of talk of the other 364 days we're all sort of brothers at arms, different but on the same mission. But just even like the back and forth in the crowd, like this isn't like Red Sox Yankees, you know what I mean? Nobody's saying Army sucks or Navy sucks. Like there is a baseline respect for everything everyone, there's a sort of a shared experience, even though it's different. And then you see the wives, you see the families, you could see it just sort of touching everybody involved. So I was really fired up to go, really grateful for the experience, and it was just a great day of football.
I noticed, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think that behind the set that we had the net up that we do occasion or most every week. Because, who better to stand guard back there than the Corps and the Brigade? And they had the clever signs, the one we posted on social media from a cadet at West Point that said, if Maverick had gone to West Point, Goose would still be alive. And there's one that there's one that makes its way to game day at Army Navy every time we've been there. That, you know me, I chuckle at the simple ones. Week in, week out, I usually laugh at the SpongeBob signs, no matter how many times I've seen them. But the one that simply says, Army swims in the shallow end, makes me laugh every time. I don't know. I mean, it's just like simple. It's insulting, but it's still kind of in the spirit of those two great institutions.
Yeah. So since I slinked off to the parking lot to get my afternoon going, I didn't see you after the show, Rece. I would be really curious. I was touched on the set by how much Bill Belichick had an affinity for Lee Corso. Yeah. And people had sort of spoken about it, and I'd heard a bit of the history and saw Coach get teared up when they showed those highlights of a young Lee Corso. I watched those a bunch. I mean, gosh, that was really cool. But I was curious what it was like up there with Bill there, and I imagine that was palpable. You could feel it.
No doubt about it. Bill has such a great appreciation for the history of the game. He has such a reverence for Navy because of the time that his father spent there as an assistant coach and a scout, and because of the fact that Bill grew up there. And, watching, he remembers vividly going and watching Lee run drills when Lee was a position coach. And, the story he told that tied in with the video that we showed, which I told the story on the air. The video, I recall vividly, we were doing a story on Navy, and one of our production assistants was on site, I think, going through some of the archive video that Navy had. And this was pure happenstance that they stumbled on that video that we've now shown a few times on Game Day over the years, with Lee talking and Lee coaching and being interviewed and then being thrown into the water. And then, we debated on Friday about, I said, should we maybe roll that video when Bill's up there? And we ultimately decided not to, but Bill had seen it before and then saw it before he came on set and then referenced it and told a story about it, about his dad telling LC that water's getting colder. It's getting colder, Lee, and it was just, he has such an appreciation, love, and passion for the game as a whole and for Navy particularly. And to see that side of him was really cool. I had a hunch that we were going to get something similar to that, because Kirk and I called the Navy BYU game the opening game of 2020. BYU ripped them pretty good, and Bill came on the phone and talked about Navy football. And because his season was about to start at that time, and we thought, well, maybe we'll get a couple questions with him. We just appreciate him being on. And he starts telling stories, and he starts talking about Navy football. And, it was he stayed on through an entire drive, got to a commercial break that I had to go to break. Bill Bonnell, the great game producer, is going, Rece, we have to go to break. And in my mind, I'm going, Bill Belichick's here talking. Yeah. And so I just said, Bill, would you stay through the break? And he's like, sure. And he stayed through the break, and he came back and talked. It was phenomenal. And I thought we would get that, and it delivered. And the fact that he brought out the old school looking headgear and put it on. I mean,
was that a surprise to you?
Oh yeah, I had no idea it was going. I saw him reaching for something when we got there, and it looked like he was having trouble getting something out from under the desk. I'm like, what? Maybe he's going to give Coach something or something of that sort. And he pulled. It was a great moment. One of the more memorable celebrity guest picker moments that we had. And I also think that all of us collectively, you were involved in the discussion, me, you, Pat, Desmond, Michelle Rosenhaus, who produced the show for us, Matt Garrett, our coordinating producer. And I was really pleased that we all came to the theme, because in the end of not picking a whole bunch of games with Bill Belichick, sitting there not doing it the same way. And Bill didn't want to pick a lot of the early bowl games. He didn't want to do that. And the fact that we said, you know what, we're good. There'll be time to talk about those other bowl games. We've got Bill Belichick on here with Lee Corso to talk about, this rivalry, football in general. You got the greatest coach, and as Pat said, greatest general manager in the history of the sport sitting right there. And so why not take that 5, 6, 7 minutes, however long it lasted, and have some fun and let him tell stories and let him interact with LC. And it was just extraordinarily memorable. The one thing I wanted to ask him, though, and next time I see him, I'm going to ask him this. They have the Belichick collection. I think it's on the third floor of the Navy football building, which basically is like every football book you can imagine, dating back to the early days to more modern autobiographical or biographical type selections. I'd like to ask him, if you were going to send someone into the Belichick collection and just, sit down, where should they start? What would be the first book you'd have them pull out? I had it ready. We had to start broader, and then we got up against time. We ended up killing some sound that we were going to run and lead in and stuff, just because it was good and fun. And Michelle made a great decision to just ride with it. But I'd love to know that. If where would you start? Where should you start in the Belichick collection reading about football? It was.
Yeah. So a little color from behind the scenes. So when Bill came up to the set, he was with Bears Nigerian, who's kind of been his longtime consigliere, and so I went over and said hello quick. Been around them a little bit just over the years, dropping in to Foxborough for different things, and Bill just wanted to we talked about college football, and that was fun. We talked about, so he's with his daughter Amanda and his granddaughter. Amanda's the head lacrosse coach at Holy Cross, and I had met her going to see Bob Chesney this spring. So we chatted about Bob, and Bill was just like, "Oh yeah, I talked to Bob last night," and then started going just talking about the carousel, different people and stuff. So that was just fun. Bill Belichick's just a guy, loves football, and it was neat to have a few minutes and just sort of banter some things back and forth with him. I'm going to make a bold prediction, Rece, that the Belichick, what was it, a 1963 or 9 helmet that he put on?
I'm not sure. I don't recall exactly the year. It might have been 63 from the Staubach era. I don't know for sure.
And there was a special tie to it that it didn't stick with me when he said it live. But I predict that helmet will live a long time on game day highlight montages.
Oh, no doubt. If that's not in the Open next year in the Coming to Your City Open, Belichick putting on the Old Navy helmet, it's tremendous.
Those decisions are all above my pay grade, but when that happened, I was like, yes, we will see that for years to come. And that is, especially the way it manifested itself so organically. And I think the cool takeaway I had was that he appreciated, understood, and then adopted to the spirit that Coach has brought to the show. Does that make sense, Rece?
Yes.
He's clearly watched the show for all 3+ decades, and he clearly knew that moment wasn't about talking about ways to bare fronts can stop option offenses. It was we're going to reflect on the game we love, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. And that was just it was chef's kiss by Bill.
After that, later on that night, as expected, I think Jayden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy from LSU.
Pretty close, though.
It was a little closer than I anticipated, and I think the one thing that you see from that, and I don't mean to make Michael Penix supporters wistful, but and there is still speculation that maybe he's been gutting it out for a while. Might be a little healthier when Texas comes around. But had maybe continued on the trajectory that he appeared to be on after that Oregon game, and not had those games where they were still fine, with the exception of Arizona State, but not elite, I think he might have won the Heisman Trophy. But Jayden Daniels, don't misunderstand, Jayden Daniels had one of the great statistical seasons ever, but in recent memory, and was most deserving of the Heisman for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable talking about who you voted for, Rece?
Yes. I mean, it's not a big secret. I voted for Jayden. We're under no charge, and you vote too, correct?
I do, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And they ask us not to reveal our votes
before
until after. Yeah, I voted. I voted in order of finish.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
So I voted that way. I struggled with really 2, 3, and 4, because the other guy up there was the guy that I considered, because I've said it a few times on the air. I'm not so sure that Marvin Harrison isn't, the best football player. So he was worthy also, but I think to win the Heisman Trophy as a wide receiver, you have to have overwhelming numbers and moments, like Devontae Smith did in 2020.
Did he?
And I think even Larry Fitzgerald, who finished second, as I recall, probably had a season worthy of the Heisman, didn't win. So it's a difficult task.
Sure.
To win it from that position, but I ended up voting 1, 2, 3. I voted Daniels, Penix, Bo Nix.
So I stared at my ballot for a long time for one, and I ended up on Penix.
Did you?
And
Yeah.
some of it was that, we saw some of Penix's struggles a little later in the year, post Oregon, and there was a bit of a numerical swoon. No one can argue that. I've just felt like Daniels' swoon came the first week, and we just forgot about it. Does that make sense? Like, so again, they're both great. Like, this isn't. I don't have this like from the mountaintop conviction, but the totality of what Penix did, and then he did it without McMillan. That his swoon was not a coincidence that McMillan was out for basically that entire time, or played 2 plays in some of those games or whatever. So again, he has to be the most outstanding player, but found a way to will his team to that undefeated season. So didn't have a ton of conviction about that, but yeah, it was a lot of years. The Heisman ceremony is anticlimactic. I at least went into the day thinking Penix had a chance to win. I thought Jayden Daniels was going to win. He was clearly the favorite, but I didn't think it was like this no brainer from the just like some years when you're like, oh gosh, that guy has just rolled everybody over.
It's been recently in recent years. Best player on the best team. Now we've had 2 years in a row where we've had guys who were not involved in the college football playoff. And, Caleb Williams was only a game away from likely being involved in the college football playoff last year. Daniels was farther away than that. That phenomenon might be different going forward in the expansion era because, Daniels would not have made it this year, but he would have been close to the cut line if things fell the same. And you often wonder too, and I think there's a lot of diligence that goes in as the committee goes down the list, because as we've done these mock exercises in the past, a lot of times you end up spending more time because it's harder to discern who's a little bit better at 12, 13, 14. Because the resumes are and the team on the field are also similar. And you wonder if you have a transcendent player, as Daniels proved to be this year, when you're starting to talk about a playoff spot, whether that enters into the football judgment component of the committee as they look forward. But I do think that all things considered, more times than not, you're not going to have as often guys out of the playoff mix who are accepting that trophy on Sundays. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll have a Barry Sanders type season for a team that's not a contender and they win the Heisman Trophy. But I think more times than not, you're going to have teams involved in the playoff. And the last 2 years, anyway, we haven't had that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just on how the paradigm of being a contender and a finalist is going to change. I believe, Rece, I read a stat. 5 of the last 7 Heisman winners were transfers.
That's true.
Which I thought was interesting. So, if I can veer us off Heisman for a minute, but stay tied to it some, and kind of go to the other big story right now, which is I think the quarterback transfer portal that's ripping and roaring. I thought this was a really interesting point this week, and I thought it was something we could dig into a little bit here. Eli Drinkwitz made this point when looking at basically who was available last year as kind of one and done quarterbacks and who's available in other years. And he said Penix, Jayden Daniels, and Bo Nix all took a full season before they really unlocked in their offenses. So they all had good early seasons and then elite second seasons. And then Joe Burrow obviously is the archetype for the good but not great first season in there. Now, Caleb Williams was great right away. No one's going to argue that, but obviously no one's going to argue that he's one of the more talented guys that we've seen there in a while. And then you look at, and I wrote this, you look at Sam Hartman at Notre Dame, Devin Leary at Kentucky, Brennan Armstrong at NC State, To some extent, Tanner Mordecai at Wisconsin, he had some injuries. But like a lot of these guys who we spent a lot of energy and oxygen talking about last January, February, that were going to, come in and change these programs, were good. We're solid. Some were disappointing, but they weren't these paradigm changers. I just kind of curious your thoughts on that. Like I think it's an interesting big picture. Do you still need to develop at that position, even though the parameters of how you can enter it have changed?
I think the answer is yes for almost everybody. We were at College GameDay in Baton Rouge, Burrow's first season at LSU. I saw a Joe Burrow quarterbacked LSU team score 0 points. 0 points. That seems unfathomable.
Against who? Bama?
Against Alabama.
Wow.
The second year, no one could stop them. And the change from it just so happened that I also went and spent some time at LSU practice the following year, Burrow's second year. Went down, spent a day there. I was going to call the LSU Texas game early in the season, so I went to Texas and went to LSU for during fall practice or some late summer practice. And you watch them in practice, and you're like, "Huh, this looks a little different than what I saw." Now they had Joe Brady, and that was the summer that all the receivers committed to catch thousands of balls and all of that stuff. But it looked way different. Then the Texas game looked different, and Joe Burrow looked different. And some of it is the fact that he's a great player. Some of it is the fact that he probably had an offense more suited to him. But a lot of it was that he had another year. He had a second year with those guys and in his surroundings. And I think there is a ton to it. And Caleb Williams, as talented as he is, he at least was coming with the same coach, the same philosophy, big-time players coming with him. So that accelerates the learning curve a little bit.
Obviously, yeah.
But I think, man, I think you're better off, if you can, developing your guy. Now, if you can if Ohio State or Alabama or somebody had been able to, although it worked out pretty well for both of them anyway, if they've been able to convince Drake May to, come with them, okay, go ahead. That's different. But the other guys are all really good players that you mentioned. They might not be plug and play ready to go, and I think you're better off recruiting well, convincing your guys that the Carson Beck model of patience can pay off for you. I mean, Beck could have gotten mad, when Stetson Bennett was given the start ahead of him. Instead, kept practicing, kept getting better, and now he's a dude, And so I think that's the better way if you can, because more times than not, there's some bumps in the road when you try to plug and play the quarterback, because it's not just the position, it's the leadership involved. And you can come in the summer, and we hear these stories every year. The guy comes in, everybody has gravitated to him enough, and they vote him captain. But that's probably in part, not to cast aspersions toward the guy, but that's probably in part because the team knows he needs to be that. And it's a first-year guy coming in getting that honor. It's almost like they're pushing, saying, you have to do this for us. And sometimes it takes a little time.
Yeah, like Russell Wilson worked like that. Like nobody has worked. And he was a captain a few days after getting to campus and all that. But turns out he's pretty special, right? Like I called his first game in Camp Randall, and it was like, I called his games at NC State too, but doing that first game against UNLV, it was like, okay, Wisconsin now has a different kind of threat back there. They'd had good quarterbacks, but not like that. Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's in this. I don't bring this up to criticize the players who are in the portal as much as these schools pinning their hopes on something that could be fleeting, right? Like you everything has to come together and land in a very quick period of time, and that's hard.
Look, we love coaches. We get to talk to them and everything. We see different sides of them from time to time, but a coach can fall in love with the guy that he hasn't coached yet, and sometimes find the zit on the Mona Lisa with the guy that's been in his building for a couple of years. It's human nature. It's a shiny new something over there, and it's a difficult task. And then there's also the component of being afraid you're going to lose a guy, or being afraid you're going to wind up without any depth at the position too. And because it's a unique position in sports, right, Pete? I mean, you can't.
Oh yeah.
Sure. You can't. You can't move, and if you have two great center fielders, you move one of them to left. He's got a great arm. You can play center, but you can move him to right, get him in the lineup. A receiver you can rotate in. A running back you can split carries. Quarterback doesn't work that way. So I don't mind these guys looking for other opportunities. I mean, at all. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times some of them hurt their own development, and also the teams become a little bit disappointed when it doesn't happen instantaneously. And when you look in the NFL, young quarterbacks that change system,
yeah,
doesn't work. It rarely works. And the same thing can happen to a quarterback who keeps hopping and looking for the next job.
Yeah, I remember Alex Smith, who I got to know when he was at Utah, had like 5 OCs his first 5 years or something crazy like that. And the only guy that he really ended up playing well for early in his career is Harbaugh, who did a nice job with him, and then ultimately ended up replacing him, right? But there was who was the Bears linebacker who was the head coach?
Mike Singletary.
Yeah, that didn't work out well. And there was just a big churn at that position. But again, development is development. You have to develop at every level, and you need consistency has to be part of your development plan. Like you can't just churn people in, churn people out, and expect the growth to be there. Both at the high school level, college level, NFL level, like there's always development that has to be had. And I feel like in this portal era, that aspect gets overlooked more than anything.
So what do you sense right now? Are coaches still as eager to find that guy? Now that you've had the number of guys that you mentioned, several of them had, difficult seasons. Some had good, not great seasons. Mm-hmm. Some like Leary, for instance, played much better toward the end than he did early. What do you sense from coaches in terms of pursuing quarterbacks as opposed to developing the guys that they have now?
Well, I think they'd love to develop them, but the problem is, look at like Brock Vandagriff going from Georgia to Kentucky. If the opportunity isn't there, the market demands that you go. And I have no idea how much money Brock Vandagriff got, but he was a former high-end recruit with a ton of talent. And if you're going to go start in the SEC, you're going to probably make 6 mid-figures. That's an estimate by me. I don't have receipts on that. So not only do you not want to wait, and I guess that move is made with the assumption Carson Beck is coming back. And I've heard he's at least like taking a look at the agent world and, kick some tires, and was doing so at the end of the year. You don't stick around and wait on a normal plane anymore because you have the ability to transfer without sitting, right? Because it used to be, well, why would I leave? I just sit one more year here and then I can start here. Whereas now it's like, well, I can go start and change my paradigm there. So I think coaches want the control, Rece, right? That's really what it comes down to. They don't say to me, Pete, we want the control, but they don't want to be able to lose guys as quickly. They don't want to have to re-recruit their entire roster. I've heard a dozen times in the last week, retention is the biggest challenge right now. Because that means they have to go scare up the NIL money for the 18th best player on the roster, whose 24-year-old NIL guy is telling him that he can get him a $60,000 deal if he goes in the portal. And this guy's only getting $20,000 at a mid-level ACC program or whatever. So the retention piece and just the constant attention that retention demands is a struggle, because there is no, in theory, linear mechanism to pay these guys, right? You don't have like cap space, and you don't have that. Like guys come in the office and say, hey, one coach said something funny to me. He said, there's no secrets in the locker room. There's no like everyone's like there needs to be transparency. He's like everybody knows to the dime what everyone else is making in the locker room, which makes total sense if you know team dynamics at all. So once somebody goes in and gets X amount of money, someone else is going to roll in. Like the kids talk to each other, the agents talk to each other, the parents talk to each other. Like it's a whole, it's a whole big, it's information sharing, which is positive, right? Like I want these guys to get their value and get what they're worth. But for coaches, it is a frustrating proposition to retain.
And we'll see who can get the right one. It's about finding the right fit and making sure that you have the right team dynamics, because you can throw off your dynamics too if you bring in a guy. Everybody in the locker room knows he's making a lot of money, and then maybe he struggles to adjust. Maybe he feels the heat of making a lot of money and starts pressing a little bit to try to make it work. And it's part of the professionalization of college football, which has been in place for a long time. It was just conducted in a much different manner than the manner in which everybody knows it right now. One thing I wanted to bring up when we were talking about game day, because obviously the Army-Navy thing is a completely different dynamic from what we're talking about with transfer quarterbacks. And even them, talking to Jeff Monken and some of the offensive changes that Army made, and as they try to mesh a little shotgun system with the under-center stuff that they've done so well for so long. They're going to the American. He and I were talking about recruiting and different things of that nature. And he said, look, we're still going to get the same guys we're going to get. But he said, I'm not going to lie. I thought there's a guy trying to decide and we let him throw it a little bit more, maybe it'll help us, but he said, basically, you're going to wind up with the same guys. So it's a different dynamic there. But we had guests at the show Saturday morning. We had Taylor and Sara in person joined us. Hopefully we rolled out the red carpet for them. So what did you guys think? Was that the first time you guys have been on? I know it is with us, but is it the first time you've been on site for game day in your lives, or have you been there before?
I went to College GameDay in 2016 for Army Navy in Baltimore. Yeah, covered it for my guys, The Solid Verbal, did the Radio Row thing, and then caught the show in the Inner Harbor, which was a great setting, but we had an awesome time. Yeah,
so cold. It was so cold that day. It was a great setting, but the wind was, whipping in there big time.
And that was the when Army ended the streak, and I got to get on the field, and the place was jumping. So Pete, I feel you. Like that energy is different. You've never experienced it before. It's a lot of fun.
What did you think of the flyovers? Like that's what I'll remember 10 years from now. The aerial pageantry.
Those guys that when they parachute into the stadium, that is nuts. Like truly, I'm like I can't relate to those guys, and it's remarkable what they do.
Yeah. Well, you see them leave the plane. Like the plane flies over, they narrate it, and then you see them leave, and you're like, there's no, and then you're like, oh, and then it's like 30, 35, 40. It's like, whoa, that's bonkers.
I have a cousin, my first cousin, Jeff Steele, who was a member of the Golden Knights parachute teams when the Army has over 3,500 jumps. He actually came to the show at James Madison, as he's retired and that's where he lives now. But I often would joke with him, why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane? But he was into it. I didn't get to meet Grammy this weekend, but I did meet Sarah's mom, and she was loaded up, ready. Shows that I'm predictable in my questions, and she absolutely had the perfect retort for me, did she not, Sara?
Oh my gosh, she was practicing that answer for so long. She was like, I'm so ready. I hope they ask me about Nebraska football.
Yeah, okay, so tell them what I asked and what your mom said.
So Rece asked, what are we going to do about Nebraska? And my mom, without hesitating, without skipping a beat, goes, what do you mean? We're in the Final Four. We're a volleyball school now.
That was perfect. Your mom, and was it your aunt too that was? No,
it was Marissa's aunt, I think.
Yeah, Marissa's aunt was there. Who didn't your mom have someone else with her, Sara, or not?
No, it was just her and I.
Okay.
I had surgery earlier this week, so she was in town to help take care of me.
Okay. Well, your mom was delightful. It was great to meet her, and she was. It was great to have you guys with us. So you have to do that more often.
Yeah.
What is the Big Red status in the postseason now? Forgive me for not keeping up.
We're in the Final Four. They are headed to Tampa They play December 17th, and Patty and Grammy will both be in attendance. So they are very, very excited.
Hey, Pete, listen, she was breaking down to me the number of freshmen that Nebraska volleyball starts. And so this dynasty is just going to.
You got a burgeoning dynasty.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
All right. I bet they have great volleyball NIL there.
Oh, yes.
Some setter from Long Beach State's about to get a bag dropped.
Lexi Rodriguez, our libero, I believe she has a deal with Adidas. Like, they're doing great. They're doing great.
And if you have any trouble there with the NIL with the volleyball stuff, let me know. I'll get Trev Alberts on the case and see if we can get that fixed. There. Oh man, no, it was great to meet him. Taylor, did anything from the standpoint of watching the show as you did behind the scenes? And I don't know if you went in the truck or not. Anything strike you about the way the show's pulled off from that?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I got Lindsay Lloyd, Ryan, Rachel. I mean, absolute rock stars behind the scenes. I'm so thoroughly impressed by that. They're just buzzing around the whole time, and I'm just a lowly podcast producer who sits in a chair all day. So to see them hustle was pretty cool. But also the whisking of you guys in and out of places is pretty impressive. I saw Pat McAfee get handed the keys to a getaway car. Rece, I was hoping to say goodbyes, but you literally had a police escort to get out of there. So I was like, okay, I'll see you guys on Monday. So that was pretty fun. And then I really enjoyed how Pete just is bouncing around, behind the scenes. And Pete is a master networker. And when Bill Belichick showed up, I knew our guy would be there to shake hands and say hello.
Yeah. It's soon next year when we start showing our guests coming up. We used to do this with Gene and Rinaldi when they were with us because they were always there and they always got in the shot. Pretty soon we're going to start showing those coming up on the show. Bill Belichick, we're going to take the live shot right there, and Pete will be right there and getting some FaceTime on the show like that too. I
need to know who's going to get the Holy Cross job, right?
Well, and you know what else, guys? Taylor and Sara had a delightful dinner on Thursday night with Pete and Kate, Jess Sims and Michelle Rosenhaus, who produced the show this week. We had a great time. Pete treated, which dispels all of the rumors about his arms not reaching into his pants pockets. So his arms are in fact long enough to get to his wallet. So I
pay my debts, man. Catholic guilt's a powerful driver. I pay my debts. But we did have a nice time. Appreciated you coming over. It was a lot of fun to have Kate sort of see our dysfunctional road family 15 weeks into the season and how we do it. But yeah, it was good. It was great restaurant. There may have been some division at the table over who was rooting for who in the Patriots-Steelers game. Rece, like the good host he is, wanted the future guest picker to win the game, so he'd be in a good mood. Yeah. I was perhaps erring on the side of wanting Drake May in New England. So wouldn't have been disappointed if Mr. Tomlin and the boys snuck in a late score or two and kept the Patriots atop of Tankathon, which I Google once a week to see where the Patriots draft order is. So yeah, It was good backdrop listening to Kirk and Al while we had a bite to eat. And don't think for a second, Taylor, that Rece didn't when this was our bet over Texas making the playoff. Our listeners would remember that. So I wanted to pay it off immediately. Baby. Hook 'em. Yeah, I wanted to pay it off immediately because I also have to pay off the steak bet. Rece and I are gonna pony up for Stanford Steve, who's probably eyeing like an 130-ounce Wagyu ribeye somewhere in Los Angeles.
There are plans underway. I don't know if I'm supposed to say them yet, but this would be great. There's a am I
yeah. We're
yet?
efforting some sort of solution here, no matter where we land. Go ahead.
Okay, so there is we'll land someplace, but maybe do the podcast from a renowned steakhouse in the Southern California area that might have a competition among Rose Bowl teams prior to that they've done for years and years. Have you ever been to that, Pete?
I've never been. I've obviously seen and read about it before, and I do think it is like a cool tradition in that in the 50s that must have been awesome to see those guys. The dudes show up from Michigan and pound a bunch of meat in Los Angeles. But yeah, Lowry's is still rock and roll. And I don't think I've ever eaten at Lowry's, to be honest. But I do love steak. I do love maybe the fact that this is a promotional thing. It'll save me and Rece from reaching into our wallets
If we do that,
take care of.
Steve's going to insist that we do it again and do it once where we actually have to pay for it, which would be great.
That's fair. Steve's good company. We'll go deep to Steve as much as we can.
Yeah, no, that was it was a really fun weekend. And you mentioned the escape. I had some family thing I need to get back for. I like to stay for the games. I didn't get to stay this week, but I had to. I was asking Boston expert Pete, "Am I going to make my flight?" And made it with ease, thanks to Steven Hensler, who was another one of the runners on loan to us this week. He's with me all the time in College GameDay basketball, but was on loan to us this week from the SEC Nation. He got me to the airport. Great job. Henny, a great Dolphins fan, so he was feeling himself on the way over, talking about the Dolphins. So, but about to. I believe because of he's about to move to your neck of the woods. So I was teasing him and said, don't get used to December days like this. This is not how it usually is, because that was a beautiful, perfect day for football.
It was 60 on Saturday here.
It was amazing.
We went to the park.
What a great day.
No, it's been good. It's raining. It's literally turning as we speak. It's rained. It was in the 60s when we woke up today, and by the end of the day, it's going to be gray, 37, and misting, just like we like it here in November. Take all your optimism back south with you.
Nothing wrong with that. So, what are you looking forward to as we wrap up this edition before we get to the playoff? Any particular bowl game that you're looking forward to seeing?
Good question. So I am a huge advocate generally of the buffet of bowls that we're about to embrace, and I love a good Tuesday afternoon, December 26th, Bowling Green, Minnesota game being on TV. They are great ways to excuse yourself from your family, who you may have had enough time with at that point, and just go in and veg. So for the early bowl games, probably the most fun game as I scroll through here that I'm looking forward to is Arizona, Oklahoma. You're going to have a different OU team, obviously, at quarterback, and you're going to get a glimpse of the future with Jackson Arnold. And then you have an Arizona team that completely outkicked its coverage this year, maybe more than any team in the country in terms of, I don't know what their win total was going into the year and what it ended up, but
it wasn't 8.5. I can guarantee you that.
It was not 8.5. Yeah. It was probably 4.5.
Probably. Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to seeing Noah Fafita, who I think is one of the breakout players in the entire sport this year, go up against a bit of a higher class program to see where they can stand. I feel like that's a really good matchup, and it will be a classic test. The fundamental bowl tension isn't offense versus defense. It isn't special teams matchups. It is motivated versus unmotivated.
Yep, absolutely.
And Arizona will be motivated. If we had to do a motivation rankings, I would say Arizona would be, obviously outside the playoff, a top 5 motivated program. It's a shame. Oregon State, Notre Dame should be an awesome game, right? But just Oregon State's roster is just in tatters right now, it's just again, this is the world we signed up for. I'm not going to bemoan the complaints, but if both those teams were full strength, boy, would that be some fun, right? Boy, would that be some fun to see. And then we're starting to veer into the little bit of higher class games here. I guess opening weekend, Rece, right? We have the Georgia Southern Ohio Myrtle Beach Bowl. We have Jacksonville State, Louisiana in the New Orleans Bowl. RNL Carriers New Orleans Bowl, I should say.
Yes.
Miami of Ohio App State in the Cure Bowl, and then New Mexico State. That's a good day of football. But I will probably clear out for UCLA Boise.
Yeah.
Be really curious, of that day. Be really curious to see Spencer Danielson now that he's the full-time coach. Their roster has pretty much stayed intact. Their really good tailback has announced that he's coming back. Help me with the name, Rece.
Ashton Genty.
Ashton Genty, thank you.
Yeah.
UCLA. you assume back highly. Now Taylor Green's in the portal for Boise, so everything, there will be a little bit of ham and egg in there and a little bit of improv. But I think that's a pretty good game, and there will be some motivated versus unmotivated at play there.
Hey, let me ask you this, because one of the questions when we did the portal segment on Game Day Saturday, sort of laying out for people what the rules are, when you can be immediately eligible, and Kirk was fascinated by the concept of a guy being in the portal but still playing. Yes. I confess that I don't know the answer to this. You said Taylor Green's in the portal. Is that a done deal? Is he gone? Is he going to play?
I don't expect him to play. I don't know that definitively. I would think 95% of the players in the portal don't play.
Right.
That would be my unscientific, anecdotal analysis of that. But there are guys that, it has to sort of take a détente between coaching staff and player, and it's usually at a unique position.
Yeah.
There. So the fact that it's a first semester bowl maybe changes that a little bit, and I will double check that today, actually.
Yeah,
but a lot of times those guys are going on visits that weekend too.
Right. Yeah. That's a tough thing, but I know Lou Holtz always used to talk about how if you lose a bowl game, you go back to the hotel, nobody's happy, feels like the season, has been ruined. And most of the time, especially once Lou got to Notre Dame, the bowl games he was playing in had national championship significance, so you understand that. But for some of these teams for whom a bowl game is what it was intended to be when they first started, a reward for a season, there's a different feel to it. These games are, in fact, and I don't mean this to diminish them because I love them, I watch them, but they are exhibition games. And I would like to think that if I were a head coach at one of these programs, that I would completely use this to get guys extra reps, to take a look at people that I hope to be able to count on the next season, not necessarily totally at the expense of the guys who got you there, but I would broaden my rotation quite a bit and treat it for what it is. Now, there are exceptions. I know a lot of 6-6 teams don't want to finish 6-7. Well, none of them do, but you know what I mean. The stigma of a losing season might skew this view a little bit, but generally speaking, I would use it as not just the practice, but the game itself as extra spring practice. And I would be liberal in how I would substitute and who I would play and just the entire approach to it. And because this is what it is. And I know bowl people get upset with it, but there has never been a time in the history of the sport that the R+L Carriers New Orleans Bowl had any impact on the national championship. You've already either won your league or earned the right to be in this bowl game. So now I would use it to build. That's easy for me to say. I get it. And you don't want to take away a reward from the players who played the most and who've gotten you there. But I think it's a great opportunity to work a lot of young guys in different areas and maybe, if nothing else, get their feet really wet in game experience. And I'll be interested to see as we embark on this new playoff era, the expanded playoff era, where by definition, there's going to be an even greater line of demarcation between playoff and other bowl games if you start to see teams use this a little differently than they have in the past and not rely totally on trying to get motivation versus unmotivation or not motivated, because nothing is more motivating to a player than the bench or getting off of the bench. And if they know there's that opportunity, if I go show out in this game, look, I'm going to get some reps in this game, there's an opportunity to really be in the mix the following season.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and you've seen quotes from coaches saying, "Hey, we're gonna play everybody. We're gonna do that." And for a lot of ways, for reserves who coaches want to keep in the program to develop, it's a little bit of a carrot, a little bit of tease. Mm-hmm. Hey, this is how we're going to use you. This is what it's going to look like. Hey, this is what you need to work on. Now, again, that's easy to say in a December 8th press conference, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a little trickier when it's like, oh, it's 3rd and 4. We could really use a stop here against whoever. So it will take some discipline from the coaches to practice what they have preached. But I think for fans too, especially with a lot of guys opting out, your high-end NFL guys, it gives a chance for fans to get excited. Hey, man, that redshirt sophomore linebacker we have is pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's a way to sort of market what you can be to your fan base. So I think we'll see a good amount of that, Rece, coming up here.
Pete, really fun season of College GameDay. The shows in the college football playoff surrounding them, they're awesome. They're fun. They're highly viewed, but the feel is different. For sure. So great season. Can't thank you enough for everything you did for the show this year. Just phenomenal work on all fronts, and this has been fun. And we're gonna continue this as we did last year throughout. But so it's been great,
our listeners aren't gonna be able to shake us. We'll still be in the off season, the draft, a little bit of hoops in March.
Yeah, you got to get me that. You got to get me that Senior Bowl schedule, because I'm going to try to get down there or over there for a day around my basketball schedule at least. So I'll have to look at what days. You being the Senior Bowl expert that you are, would tell me which. If I roll up in there on a Wednesday and there's no reason to be there on a Wednesday, it's not a good day. That's the kind of thing you're going to have to guide me on and let me know which days would be best to see if I can make that happen around my basketball schedule.
We will walk you through. Major Applewhite, the OC at South Alabama, took me to an awesome restaurant with unbelievable oysters. The oysters in Mobile are fantastic. So you will we'll have to have a Mobile bet at some point during postseason. I think we'll have some sort of disagreement that leads to a friendly oyster wager. So.
Probably it might center around Caleb Williams and Drake May, but I don't know.
Could.
I can't.
I've already got some meals on that.
Yeah, no, I can't. Actually, as much as I love both of them. I think they're both. I think what I've said in the past, I need to clarify a little bit more. I think I've sort of thrown out the term generational talent. What I should say is generational prospect. That's more precise, I think, in the language. I do think that both of them have the chance to be like franchise cornerstone superstar guys, who can elevate everybody around them. Every quarterback needs the right personnel, right system, right coach. Every quarterback who's ever lived needs that. But there are a few who can take a lot of different ones and elevate them. I think both of those guys are that type of prospect. Now, whether they do it, there's a certain crapshoot to that, no matter how talented you are. But I think both are phenomenal. But I think Caleb goes first. So I'm not going to bet you on that one just yet.
All right. I have a Caleb 1-2 bet with McAfee, I think, actually.
Yeah.
So.
I think you do. You do. Thanks for
I'll
everything.
Cash that in at the combine.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
won't be done yet.
We're ahead of ourselves. We've got Pasadena. We may have steak at Pasadena. We've got plenty to talk about with the bowls leading up to the college football playoff. We'll continue on the pod doing that. Thanks for listening. We encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and download wherever you prefer to get your podcast.